I'm just nothing but tickled to see this many souls out here, still participating, still interested. We're going to turn the remainder of this meeting over to folks who know what they're doing, which means our consultant group and you all, and I'll stick around and help in any way I can. The rules don't change much from time to time. You all know what this is about. This is about talking to each other, listening to each other respectfully. As we like to say in this business, everybody gets their say, not everybody gets their way. So please go ahead and say what you need to say, and make sure that you listen as well. I'd appreciate that, and I'll be listening, and I'll be shutting up now. So again, welcome folks, nice to see you. Thank you. Brian.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Brian Scott. I'm the project manager for the consulting team on the West Broadway Corridor master plan, and I have the pleasure of being the facilitator of the meeting this evening and giving you the initial presentation about what's going on. I'm joined by a number of colleagues that are with me here today. With my team at MIG is Aaron Abrams, who's a specialist in public involvement and has done a lot of the arrangements for the meeting tonight and making sure that we get your input in the most effective way. Jay Rankins is in the back of the room. He's also a public involvement and urban planning specialist. He's been doing a lot of the mapping and drawings that you see around the room. Bruce Appleyard is a specialist in transportation and land use and the connection between those. He made a presentation at the Vision Workshop in November that I know a lot of you were taken with. Also with us this evening is Jeff Key from Robert Pecci and Associates from Helena. He's a transportation engineer, and he's been considering and analyzing the transportation consequences of some of the things we've been talking about today. And Abe Farkas is with Eco Northwest, which is an economics firm based in Portland and Eugene. Abe has a long background as a leader of redevelopment agencies like the Missoula Redevelopment Agency. He headed that agency in Eugene for a long time, and then was director of development at the Portland Development Commission for a long time. So he's been thinking about the economics and implementation consequences of what we've been talking about. Our agenda this evening is to start out with giving you an overview of the project, its timeline, and where we go from here. I guess I can go to the next slide. We want to just a quick review of the planning process, the context, the existing conditions, constraints and opportunities. Those of you that have been regularly coming to these meetings, that first 15 or 20 slides will be familiar. Then we want to give you a succinct overview of the public input we've had so far from the first initial kickoff meeting back in September, I think it was, and then the visioning workshop we had in November. We've also done a survey on the World Wide Web and done a number of stakeholder interviews. So we want to give you a sense of what you've told us is important about the West Broadway Corridor. And then our job, as we've been promising all along, was we were going to create some alternative development scenarios for how we might proceed with improvements to the West Broadway Corridor. Some of you, as you came in, have seen that there's a map there, and a map back there, that are the alternatives that we've been working through and evaluating today. Some of the base existing conditions information that I'll review shortly is over here if you want to get up and take a look. So I'm going to kind of give you a fast-paced, talking way too fast, review of all of this stuff, and then we'll give you a chance to ask some clarifying questions. That won't be the opportunity for discussion and debate, but I want to address any questions for clarification. Then we're going to break out and allow each of you to take a closer look at these alternative development scenarios and score them based on how you think they score on the criteria that you gave us through the previous meetings. Then we will come back together and I will lead a discussion where you all can debate the various points of that, and Aaron and Bruce have assured me that they can rapidly tabulate your results and we can share with you the results of your scoring while we're still here this evening. So that's the agenda for tonight. Just get a lot of your input, and then what we're going to do tomorrow is get back together based on what we hear from you this evening and try and refine what we think is your preferred scenario for what happens. And we'll be back together again, all of you that can make it, again in this room at 6 o'clock tomorrow evening, where we should be giving you a much more refined presentation of what we think your preferred alternative is and the economic and transportation consequences of that alternative, so we can get some further feedback, and then over the months ahead proceed with refining this master plan. So far, so good? So the process that we've been working through so far, I know you can't read this slide, but we laid out a process that went from research and analysis to considering alternative scenarios and doing a preferred scenario, and then working through refining the master plan. Where we are right now is right in the middle of this process. Over the last few months, we've been doing analysis of the site, evaluating existing conditions, doing a survey of people that were interested in the corridor. What we're doing right now, day 1, day 2, day 3, we started with a meeting of our steering committee last night to make sure that we thought we had the issues identified correctly. They reviewed the presentation I'm about to make and made quite a number of suggestions. Today we've been working on these preliminary alternatives. We're presenting them right now. We're in this box right here at the moment. Tomorrow morning the steering committee will debrief with us. We'll work through the afternoon and be back here to present to you tomorrow evening. So the context for this is, of course, is that the West Broadway Corridor, which is right here, used to be in 1900 kind of out at the edge of town, but as Missoula has grown over the last 100 years, it's become very much the middle of town and a primary gateway to your downtown. Especially in the last 30 years, Missoula has been growing rapidly, and that's been changing the issues. From 1980 to 2005, Missoula grew by 47%, much faster than the county, much faster than the state of Montana, much faster than the United States. Projections going forward to the future is that the city and county will both grow in the range of 43%. If you remember the last slide, my guess is Missoula is going to grow faster than the county. And so a lot of change is happening in your community. This is an opportunity to shape how that change impacts the West Broadway Corridor. Of course, we're not the first civic do-gooders or consultants to consider this part of town. The North Side, West Side neighborhood plan was completed in 2000, is currently being updated. There's been a review of the downtown streets, the Broadway corridor study that many of you participated in and have been critiquing ever since, the mill site redevelopment summary, the Safeway preliminary site plan, and the riverfront triangle master plan all have impacts on this. We've read all of those plans and are trying to build on the process that move forward on those. Particularly important in this is the North Side, West Side neighborhood plan, which had a lot of input from the neighborhoods to the north and west, and identified the West Broadway corridor as an important place for city center kind of style of development in the neighborhood. The riverfront triangle master plan is a little more recent. It's here's the West Broadway corridor and Front Street. It identifies a number of streetscape improvements and quite a bit of redevelopment along the riverfront, between Front and the river, and between Front and West Broadway. Identifies quite a number of opportunities, including a motel, or a hotel, a performing arts center, and a number of different things, and some of the services and parking for the hospital have been part of that plan. So there's quite an ambitious plan there that we've spent a lot of time discussing how that impacts what we're doing. There's also the Downtown Streets Project, which is basically redesigning West Broadway and Front Street intersection and making Front Street two-way further into the downtown. Some of the existing conditions that we're facing as we consider this, here's our study area that goes from, Orange over here to Mullen, thank you, going over here. So basically a couple of blocks from the river, a couple of blocks north from where we are. We've been looking at some of the existing traffic patterns and the key streets and their designations, of course, Russell And orange are key north-south routes, and West Broadway, of course, is a major route this way, with Mullen as a more minor arterial but a very important traffic pattern. We looked at some of the existing transit and trails. The district's served pretty well by transit. The trail system, we've been told consistently, it just doesn't quite work because it really clearly should go along the whole river, and it doesn't yet. We looked at traffic counts and volumes that are happening and some of the locations of key pedestrian crashes that have happened over the years, which has been driving a lot of what has been the discussion of West Broadway. And part of the reason for some of those conflict areas is where because of the shape of the river and the way it intersects the city's street grid, you've got some of these sort of funny shaped intersections like this one at, oh, I did it again, at Broadway and First, where some of those places where cars just kind of buzz off to the right have been where some of those dangerous points have been. So we've been trying to pay special attention to those as we consider what we're doing. Another observation about existing conditions is this is just a map that shows all the existing parking lots and driveways, and you probably don't need me to be standing up here to say that's a whole bunch of parking lots and driveways, which has a strong impact on the character of the street and the way automobiles and pedestrians connect, and you get a streetscape that looks pretty much like this for much of its length. The zoning in the area is a bit of an interesting contradiction. The north side, west side plan talks about the West Broadway Corridor as being a city center kind of designation with a lot of mix of uses. The zoning actually zones almost all the area along West Broadway as commercial, which doesn't allow the same kind of mixed use that you're used to in the downtown. So as we consider the alternatives tonight, an important issue is how do you want West Broadway to develop, and therefore do we need to modify the zoning to encourage that? I'm going to skip over that one. We talked about some of the constraints and opportunities, and I want to clarify again, as I did in the last meeting, we have taken it as a given that public safety is a key issue, pedestrian safety, both traffic and crime, emergency vehicles, lighting, and that this is going to be a multimodal corridor for cars, transit, bikes, and pedestrians. Nobody's told us that we should get any of those off of the street, so we're basically taking those as givens, and they represent the same in all the opportunities. Some of the constraints or challenges we're facing, the district is disconnected from the river. The zoning doesn't support the neighborhood plan. The existing development pattern of buildings, driveways, parking lots isn't very conducive to pedestrian circulation. It makes it a tough place to be a pedestrian. There's, of course, been raging controversy about the road diet and the changing of the lanes, which gives us both a great turnout at meetings, so we have an educated discussion, but it also makes a lot of tension. As we move forward, we've got the state design standards for state highways, which sometimes don't say what we want them to say in terms of what we want in our own community. And of course, we have challenges with funding. On the opportunity side, boy, we've got a wonderful river that's just right there. We have many opportunities to make the street more pedestrian friendly. We can improve emergency vehicle access. We can create a sense of place. There's a high public interest, which gives us a real asset. You have a very strong redevelopment agency that has an opportunity to help move this forward, opportunity for public-private partnerships, and connecting to the trail system and parks. So clear connections to a beautiful river and a wonderful, vital downtown, and a pedestrian environment and a river trail system that have a lot of opportunity for improvement. Economic opportunities, the proximity to the downtown has an opportunity to attract businesses. Downtown can extend into the corridor. The river is an attractor for businesses. You've got great market anchors in the hospital that we're in this wonderful facility, and the opportunity to have a new supermarket as a major business anchor. It's a primary transportation route. It's a key intersection with North and Stout streets. You can use tax increment financing to facilitate development, and you can build a true mix of uses. So that was kind of the analysis that the consultants did by various things to figure out where we were. And then we had an opportunity for quite a lot of public input. And I just want to start this section with a clarification. There's been a lot of question. The assignment that this consulting team was given was to consider the long-term land use development pattern for the West Broadway corridor so we could investigate a transportation plan that would support the land use dreams that you have. So our primary focus on this has been to talk about what the land uses should be on West Broadway in the long-term future and consider the economic and transportation impacts there, not to facilitate a debate about whether or not we should have 3, 4, 5, or 23 lanes. So our hope is tonight you can talk about the long-term future of West Broadway and then let us move forward and let the community move forward with figuring out where you go with the lanes in the more short term. So we started the public input on this process. Many of you that were there at the meeting in October when we basically just took your ideas out of the gate and your questions and made a record of that, and we've been thinking about the things we learned there. We used that as an opportunity for us to get acquainted with Missoula. Then we had a more developed visioning workshop in November in which we presented the existing conditions and had a bunch of you sit around. I think many of you were here. I recognize a lot of familiar faces. You sat around tables and considered maps and thinking about guiding principles for moving forward with the corridor, and I'd like to share the results of that with you now. The visioning elements, we asked you what key pieces of your vision were, and our staff have then been really going over all of those maps and the reporting back. And some of the common themes from the tables were more and safer crossings of West Broadway. I know that's a surprise. Improved and increasing lighting, a safer feeling, multimodal transportation, more landscaping, accessibility to businesses, mixed-use development, sense of place and community, creating view and access to the river and West Broadway trails. This is an illustration. Then we had you on your map. We said, draw your vision. And if you took I think there were 11 tables that worked on that, and if you took them all and kind of mushed them together and squinted a little bit, this would be kind of the sense that we had. Essentially, with strong consensus that we would have a mix of commercial use on the north side of the street, primarily mixed commercial and residential on the south side of the street, plans for some residential development up here, some key gateway opportunities throughout the district, and some debate about how much the river development should be public or should have opportunities for residences overlooking the river. Clear consensus that we need to get access to that island and make better use of that. Second thing, some of the pedestrian improvements, clear areas, no question that there needs to be strong trail system and connections across the river for pedestrians. Some key opportunities for safety concerns and improvements throughout the area, and major pedestrian crossings, a lot of ideas for key areas there, and then some bus stops. On the right-of-way improvements, some key opportunities for lighting, intervention on sort of traffic issues, and suggestions about various signals and other things. So we evaluated all of those and thought them through, and they helped educate our work today. We also did a survey on the World Wide Web to give people that wanted to participate. It was up on the web for about 20 days, from the 15th of December to the 5th of January. We told people about it via email, a direct link from the project website, a flyer, a mention in the newspaper. We got, much to our delight, 560 responses in 20 days. There were 12 questions. 3 of them were basic demographics, understanding who was answering, and then 6 multiple choice and 3 open-ended questions about what did you want. Everybody that responded to the survey was 19 years old or older, so it was an adult survey. Most respondents were 35 to 54 years old, a few more men than women, but it was pretty close, nicely balanced. Most of the respondents lived in the closest in zip codes north and south of the area, 801, 802, and 803. Highlights of the results. Why do you use the West Broadway Corridor? Accessing downtown, accessing Reserve Street, and visiting local businesses were far and away the strongest reasons that you use the street. Only 3 people that answered it said they didn't use the corridor at all. Best type of development. We asked, what would you like to see in development in the years ahead? And this was sort of a continuum where we said low density, large scale development, kind of like Reserve Street. When we said lower scale, small density development, kind of like it is now. Medium density neighborhood, kind of like the Hip Strip, or dense mixed use, kind of like downtown. You can see the responses drifted toward the denser end with by far most of the respondents kind of in the medium to high density, and very few people saying they wanted to see it lower density than it is now. Highlights on high priority motorized uses for the district, local business traffic, downtown access, neighborhood access, probably not a big surprise there. Less passion for deliveries, freeway access, and freight. That probably has to do with who answered this survey. Result highlights key priority functional improvements, by far the strongest pedestrian crossings, personal safety, and vehicular safety were by far the strongest issues there. High priority motorized, just did that. Most appropriate bicycle facilities, an off-street bike path, hands down winner that clearly people thought the opportunity for an off-street bike path was something that was worth pursuing. Results, intersections needing the most attention, Russell, California Tool, and Orange, probably not a big surprise there. Pedestrian crossings needing attention, Tool, California, Russell, and Front. So then quick results of the web survey, and then we also did a number of stakeholder interviews with people that we knew were really passionate about the street and needed to have their issues really listened to in person. These were done in person and by telephone since November 15th. We contacted 20 people, completed 17 interviews. They were kind of semi-structured. We had some set questions, and then we probed beyond those questions. We got key support for the riverfront and trails, access to the river and open space, the beautifying the corridor, more and better landscaping, and more and better lighting. We had a mixed report on pedestrian safety improvements and denser pedestrian scale development. Some people were passionate about that. Some people thought it was not important. So then the result of the community vision. So we took all of this input from the vision meeting, the first meeting, these results, and we tried to push it together into guiding principles for our night. And I know this is long, but you all said a lot of stuff. So the West Broadway Corridor will be a safe, vibrant, and attractive multimodal transportation gateway to downtown Missoula, framed by and serving a dense mix of pedestrian-oriented, residential, and commercial development. All users will have access to a well-planned mix of destinations, including businesses, residences, the Clark Fork River, trails, and open space. A well-lit and landscaped West Broadway will give priority to those accessing local businesses and residences. So that's it. That's all we got to do. From the vision workshop, we had you really talk about what your vision was, and we listened to that, and then we modified it based on the web survey and the stakeholder interviews, and we think we came away with 6 key guiding principles that we think are what we're trying to achieve here. Streetscape design, safety, connections and linkages, user accessibility, development, and land use. And we're going to ask you in a few minutes to score our work today based on those guiding principles. Let me expand on those just a little bit. For streetscape design, you told us to create a gateway to Missoula in the downtown, preserve and enhance the river views, enhance the feeling of open space, landscape the street and the riverfront, include opportunities for public art along the corridor, and improve signage and wayfinding. So pretty clear direction that you want to see a strong streetscape design. Not surprisingly, you told us a lot about safety, ensuring safe crossings of Broadway, enhancing public safety, increasing and improving lighting, providing buffers between the pedestrian and traffic, and slowing down traffic at the same time we're moving it more efficiently through the corridor. In terms of connections and linkages, connecting the corridor to the community and the river, extending downtown westward into the corridor, improving north-south routes, and increasing and improving pedestrian and bicycle crossings of the river. User accessibility, ensuring all aspects are considered for all users, with a lot of concern about people with different abilities and needs. Integrating on and off street pedestrian and bicycle system, creating a really multimodal corridor, accommodating all modes of transportation safely, and encouraging public transportation. And finally, development and land use, which we think is really the anchor behind what's going to happen, that some of the streetscape improvements are the details after we figure out what the plan is for development and land use. We were told to enhance and support mixed-use development that supports neighborhood character, encouraging policies that support local and small businesses, include pedestrian-oriented development or pedestrian-friendly development with fewer driveways and parking not so present on the street, and reducing the number and size of surface parking lots. I just want to clarify, pedestrian-oriented doesn't mean it's only pedestrians, it just means that it's supportive of pedestrians and making it comfortable for those. So, the reason you came to this meeting was to see what we've been up to, and I'm finally going to get there. What we've spent the last couple of months doing was getting ready for this, doing the analysis that I just talked about, and what we've been doing the last 36 hours is really going to work on what are some of the choices that we think Missoula has. And we've tried to include analysis of land use planning, development opportunities. We've tried to be realistic about economics and not put anything up here that we think is impossible or extremely difficult. And we've tried to make sure that we thought about the transportation impact. So we have three alternatives that we think make some sense. They're very different choices. And part of that is because we want to stimulate discussion tonight. But we're not putting up anything here that we don't think is possible in Missoula, Montana in the first quarter of the 21st century. So we named our three alternatives: downtown extension, a neighborhood commercial village, and distinct nodes and zones. And I'll try and describe all of those. It's been a busy day. We have diagrams on the wall, which I'll show you. The slides aren't so good at the diagrams because we just shot them while you were walking into the room. But I'll try and describe these as best I can and be open to ask your questions, and the members of the team will be around when you're going to look at them in more detail. So first of all of these schemes had some common features because we think we had clear direction that really wasn't controversial. In every case, we thought there's some good landscaping to the west of Russell at the moment. We think that should be enhanced, and it's an area that's a little distant from everything else. We thought the best solution here is to make it look better, not worry too much about immediate land use changes. We included landscaping throughout the corridor, and it would probably change from one scenario to the next, but basically it's there throughout. Better street lighting, better pedestrian crossings, an off-street bike path along the river, and implementing the riverfront triangle plan. So if I don't make that clear, we think all of these things are represented in all the schemes that we have, so they're not really alternatives. They're things that we think are worth doing and you want to do them. So the first notion, we had several people have told us through this process that what we really want to see West Broadway be is an extension of downtown Missoula into the corridor. So we spent a fair amount of time today saying, how would you do that? First of all, we think there needs to be a very strong development node. That's kind of a planning jargon, but an intensive point of development at the corner of Orange and West Broadway, because to get from downtown into the corridor, the first thing that happens has to be exciting. Second, we need to strongly implement the riverfront triangle plan because it's key to making this work. We need to support and encourage hospital expansion in a way that activates West Broadway as it goes by the hospital. We think in this one, the Red Lion Hotel needs to, in the long run, be redeveloped into a more a taller and more dense hotel that has a stronger active edge to the downtown. And finally, we'll gradually see a mixed-use transition from primarily commercial close to downtown to primary residential as we go to the west. Illustrating that, again, I mentioned a very strong node at West Broadway and Orange, because you're never going to get into the corridor as a pedestrian if the first thing that happens isn't going to be very strong. It's very important in this zone, the first few blocks, basically from Orange up past the red line, here's the railroad tracks. Everything that happens in there, the riverfront plan needs to have very active uses, the riverfront triangle plan, storefronts, windows, it has to be very active so it feels like downtown. The buildings have to be taller than they are now, except for the hospital. You really have to get this right at this end of the plan, and it's going to be a lot of work. Then we think there's sort of a gradual transition zone, and you get to the middle and close to the California Street bridge. And then we think the development up at this end would be more likely to be residential, but in this zone where you want it to be, or in this plan when you want it to be more like downtown, we're talking about reasonably dense residential. All the way through the corridor, we'd be looking for buildings that are 3 to 5 stories tall at every opportunity to really give a sense of a different place than it is now. So I have, and here the sense of this transition zone where you move forward. So here's an example of how things might change. This is West Broadway today, basically right out in front of this building looking to the west. So the example I'm going to give you isn't of this street, but I think you'll see a number of striking similarities. You see the scale of the buildings, you see the width of the street, you see the character of the parking and other things. So here's another street. It's not West Broadway, I'm not even actually sure where it is. But you'll see that there are quite a few things about it that have some similarities. Right at the close end in this, you see some buildings that are kind of up against the street. They have a bit of a character of maybe a downtown, but then further on, buildings are more set back. There's a lot of surface parking, not a lot of on-street parking. So this is a photo simulation that we did for another client to think about how would the street change if you started putting in some elements to make it more like a downtown. So first of all, if you developed a building that looked more like a downtown building at that corner, you'd see that it'd have a pretty dramatic impact on what's happening. There's 2 buildings actually in this simulation. If you did that and then you move forward with some streetscape improvements, improving the street trees and other things, you begin to have a very different character to the street. It shows some more development happening down this way, things happening close to the street. And finally, our vision was over 20 or 25 years, with streetscape enhancements, you could create a pretty dramatic environment. So we think a scenario that says extend downtown to the west along the West Broadway Corridor means a heck of a lot of development that's really close together, it's tall, and it's right up near the street. I think this is relevant to the scale of Missoula, and it is possible, but it would take aggressive effort by the redevelopment agency and others to move forward with this scenario. Second concept we called neighborhood commercial village. And I guess the basic premise of this is, on the one hand, we just talked about a downtown extension and how do we turn an auto-oriented strip or corridor into a downtown. We thought, well, another approach would be to say, heck, it's an auto-dominated strip and corridor. Let's just admit it and move forward accordingly. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what would that look like. Now, you already have plans in place for, oh. Got the wrong photo in here. Ouch. Okay, so I'm just going to describe this one. Our scenario here was that you'd still, at this end, because you've got the riverfront triangle plan already in place, we still think that's logical to pursue that and move forward. But rather than make as much attempt in this area where the hospital is and the the Safeway and the future Safeway site and the Red Lion, rather than really working to seek height and density through that area, we thought, let's just move forward with, allow those things to be what they are and focus really in this area, in an area we called a green view, basically a place where you really focus on the view of the river. That's where it's very narrow between West Broadway and the river. And allow that to be the pleasant part of that is the view of the river. And then moving up into this way, we identified between Russell and the California Street Bridge, there is basically a 19-acre area there there are a few pretty recent buildings in there, but many of the buildings in that area have been there a long time and probably over the course of a long-term planning horizon could see some substantial redevelopment. We thought about what could you build on 19 acres? And what we got to thinking about was what people often call a lifestyle center or a neighborhood commercial village. Some people we were talking to earlier today mentioned the University District in Seattle as an opportunity. We also talked about a project in Coeur d'Alene, the Riverstone development, and something where you actually would develop what is basically a shopping center in this area, primarily accessed by cars and surface parking, good access from the south across the improved Russell Street Bridge, good access from West Broadway. It would be a place where some people are now going out to Reserve, to the big box. This would be an opportunity for more shopping opportunities closer into central Missoula. Here we are illustrating this idea of a village square right north of the river, just past the California Street Bridge, and between there and Russell. So an example of how that might change, here's the street out there looking kind of the wrong way from where we are, but right in the center of the corridor. As I mentioned in Coeur d'Alene, there's a thing called the Riverstone, which is between downtown Coeur d'Alene and the interstate out there along, what's the name of that street? Highway 95, and there's really quite a complete development out there with some housing, a movie theater, a number of shops, Talbot's, other kind of stores like that give you a real shopping sense in the area, primarily accessed by cars, but a real strong connection to the river, probably some housing that would be close in along the area. And then the final scenario was thinking about West Broadway as a series of distinct zones. Basically recognizing that in this one, where we wouldn't have quite as intensive a development as in the first one, or even in the second one, we'd have a little more room for a much more intensive greenway along the river. We thought you have three zones. You've got the downtown zone and the riverfront triangle, which is going to be mostly like downtown. Then you have the Greenview zone in the middle, and then finally a mixed neighborhood and commercial zone to the west end of the corridor. Here's an illustration of that. Is this the right one? It is. So the downtown zone here, this Greenview zone where we focus on the views of the river, a more intensive greenway along the riverfront than we probably had room for in the other ones, and then a mixture of sort of commercial development and residential development along the river to the west. And again, the sort of neighborhood node, we also thought there would be an opportunity. In this one, we would probably, to give it more character, we probably recommend developing a more exciting and vibrant intersection at Burton, and a stronger sort of sense of all four corners of that intersection as a gateway into the downtown. And just to sort of illustrate that with what's already there, in the downtown extension zone, you'd want to really encourage development like you've just seen recently here in the riverfront triangle. In the Greenview zone, you want to really do everything you can to enhance views of the river, not worry so much about what happens on the other side of the street, but try and make this a real connection to the river experience. And then to the west, you want to encourage more infill of housing and commercial development along the corridor.
Between Russell and Reserve on 3rd, because it's kind of non-existent right now.
So we've been focusing pretty much north of the river. So with the exception of one drawing being completely the wrong drawing, I've made an attempt to try and describe these three alternatives. And where we're going to go from here is ask you to go take a look at them and give us some feedback on those alternatives. Before we go there, I'll give you instructions for how to do that in just a moment. But before we go there, I want to take an opportunity to field any questions about what I've just said so we're clear on what I said. I don't want to get into a debate about the merits of these at the moment. I want to just clarifying questions. Yes, ma'am. Well, I think of vibrant as active with a lot of people out on the street and probably a number of businesses that are facing the street with windows of the street, and there's a lot of sort of action on the street. That's how I think of vibrant. Yes?
So with all of this that's happening, are we just assuming that then also the traffic is going to be just a cinch? I mean, partly I thought partly why we're here is because the traffic still doesn't run smoothly on Broadway. So which one of those is going to make the traffic run more smooth?
We would be happy to address our thoughts about what those three scenarios how they'll impact traffic volumes. As we've understood our assignment so far, we want to talk about what's the long-term future of West Broadway and then address what to do about traffic, because you do different things based on what the long-term future for West Broadway is. So we're thinking a little longer term. I understand that there are people that have a lot of energy about where we are right now, and we're trying to think about the longer-term future first. Yes, sir, in the corner.
I'm unclear about the distinction between the second and third scenario. Can you say a bit more about that?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Thank you. In the second scenario, that is the neighborhood commercial village, and it's on the drawing in the back of the room back there, and Bruce is pointing to that bubble where his hand is, which is between Russell and California Street. There's a 19-acre parcel in there, and we're talking about turning it into a pretty serious shopping center. And making it a combination of, we were calling it not big box retail, but small box retail. The kind of things that you see in some of these high quality centers that are being built in various places. We think it's a good location in Missoula. It'll mean people that are into bikes and pedestrian transportation can get to those kind of stores without going clear out to Reserve. It has good automobile access. We're talking about it being a fairly serious focus on development. In the third scenario, which is back over there where Aaron is pointing, we talked about three different zones, that zone being kind of residential, commercial along the corridor there, the area we were calling Greenview in the middle, which is basically across the street from the new Safeway site and the hospital, really focusing on trying to make that a great view of the river and less intensive, and then the zone down by the riverfront triangle being more of a downtown character. So there's quite a lot more development in scenario B than there is in scenario C.
Scenario C makes the West End more residential than mixed use.
Right. There'd be a lot more commercial at the West End in scenario B and a lot more residential in scenario C. Yes, sir.
Shopping center is already preoccupied with brand new condos right along the river. Are you incorporating that in that vision?
Well, we certainly would work around brand new condos. There's 19 acres in there, and there's maybe one or two that have brand new condos on them. So, yeah. I know what you're talking about, and we wouldn't take those out, but it's talking about significant redevelopment in the area. Yes, ma'am.
One thing I didn't understand about your presentation
zoning, the commercial zoning, was not in line with the city center land use designation, where as our commercial zoning permits everything except industrial uses, and at pretty high densities residential and high density commercial. So although it could use improvement, I mean, there's no requirement that things be mixed, but it certainly allows all of those uses.
You could be right. Where our sense of the zoning as it is now probably is not so compatible with scenarios A and B in this, but that would need to be explored. And you'd certainly, and to achieve A or B, you'd have to use a lot of incentives and public tools to move things. Just making something legal doesn't mean that it's gonna happen. Yes, sir.
I'm sure that one of the hardest elements of your task has been trying to focus on inside your boundary lines of your area, because I know as land use planners and transportation planners, you by nature can't think just about what's inside that boundary. How were these alternatives influenced by what exists outside those boundaries but adjacent to it?
Well, we basically tried to read the relevant plans and talk to people about relevant things that are happening outside. We've been assuming a substantial increase in traffic with the new bridge on Russell. We figured that was a given. We've been assuming a continuing to be vital downtown. We've been assuming gradual increase in traffic along West Broadway, although depending on the various scenarios we gave you, we think that we would impact that. Some of those would have more traffic than others. So we've tried to be aware of the other things that were going on. We know that a piece of any of these has got to be some buffering to the north and west neighborhoods from whatever's happening on West Broadway. So we tried to be sensitive to those things. Whether we got everything, I don't know, certainly not. Yes, ma'am.
So how do these different scenarios affect current businesses on this one?
Well, they would impact current businesses in different ways. Some of the scenarios, I would say, well, especially the scenario C probably has the least impact on existing businesses in the short run. And in the scenarios where we think about long-term land use designation, it's kind of business neutral, because there's probably no business out there that couldn't survive, but it maybe would be in a new building or in a different scenario. Most of these consider quite a lot of redevelopment.
And then who pays for new building? The current business owner, or is it the city, or how does that work?
Now that you raised a hard question, I get this. Great. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, A-Park is part of the consulting team over here. Often when redevelopment activities like this occur, it's a combination of the public and private sector that work with the businesses. In many cases, a private developer has resources and can assist with the relocation. In other cases, if the public sector, and here you've got the Missoula Redevelopment Agency, which has the capacity to acquire and assemble land, and they would get involved in relocation assistance payments. So businesses, as Brian said, if they're viable businesses, usually have a very good opportunity to survive. In fact, many of them will survive and be even healthier in other locations, particularly if they've been in buildings that are dated and have awkward access. So it's a combination.
So in an effort to make sure that my veterinarian is not completely put off by this process, a couple things you should know. One is the city, what we're doing is asking you to create a vision for us. That does not mean we automatically go out and implement everything on the vision. And as much as I'd like to have the dough to buy you another building wherever you'd like it to be, we're not going to do that. Redevelopment is going to happen as a function of, I think, private enterprise in the market. But we do have a redevelopment agency that's in a position to help in this district. So that's kind of what's happening here. What I don't want you to think as you talk about this is I better not say that, because next thing you know, I'm going to have to build a 4-story veterinary hospital on the corner of Russell and Broadway, and name it Cats in Debt on Broadway. So I just want to clarify that for you. This is about vision and planning, and not about a set-in-stone roadmap and requirement that requires eminent domain. You never heard that word
talking about relocation, it's like, I like my location, but I don't really want to move somewhere.
And it's also yours, and you own it.
Yeah.
We're not gonna change that.
This 19 acres now, is that between Scott Street and Russell, both sides of Broadway?
And it's south of Broadway, and south of Broadway, between Broadway and the river, from Russell to California. And of course, this is very rough. Maybe it would be better Scott Street. I mean, we're trying to work out the details. What we've drawn is basically California to Russell. South of Broadway. North of the river, south of Broadway. Sorry.
Just one more. The uncontrolled access points are always worrisome to me in terms of public safety. Do any of these designs address that or attempt to reduce the number of uncontrolled access points?
Good evening, Jeff Key. I guess to answer your question, you're exactly right. You know, the number of uncontrolled access points have a huge effect on, you know, the transportation system and network. And at this point, these alternatives, we haven't gotten to that fine detail, but certainly, depending how the vision develops tonight, you know, that's one of our major tasks tomorrow is what do you do with these accesses? How do you structure them so you can either combine or share or maybe reroute the access? And so at this point in this process, the answer is no. But certainly that's something that you know, needs to be explored as we kind of pinpoint a preferred alternative.
Okay, so our goal this evening is to get your feedback on these plans, and we've had some clarifying questions. And what I'd like you to do now for the next few minutes, I'm going to guess we can do this in 15 or 20 minutes, and I'll just kind of keep an eye on how everybody's. Yes, sir.
When we were talking the last time, there was kind of a novel idea came up of a waterfront or a little harbor or whatever you want to call it, but kind of a real new idea. Which one of these three tends to kind of incorporate that?
We spent some time today talking about the idea of really embracing the river, and I think in all the schemes we think getting access to the island is important. In every case we think enhancing the waterfront along the river is important. We did also talk about trying to create much more of a place to put into the river and take out of the river. Probably, I guess our thinking was somewhere in the range of between California and Russell. And I think we think that's a good idea regardless, and it would be in scenario C, that would probably be less intense, there'd probably be more green. In scenario A, it would probably be more incorporated into residential development. In scenario B, it would probably be very much part of this mixed-use center that we're talking about, that would be a place where you'd get in and there'd be, a bar and a dock and a ramp and stuff like that.
Clarksport running through here, not unlike the Canada River.
Sure, sure.
How everything just kind of moves right to the water, not unlike what it was here 70, 80 years ago.
Well, we feel like we've heard very strong instructions from all of you that we really need to embrace the river in a stronger way regardless, and it was partly more of the character of that. Yes, sir?
And scenario B and C, both, it seems like mountain water company is an incredibly large player in that because they own so much property down there. Have you talked to them at all about their long-term plans?
At this stage the answer is no. At this stage in the process, if we start trying to make real estate deals, first we have to figure out sort of generally what we're trying to accomplish, and then we have to, get serious about who owns the land, who's inclined to participate, and there's a much greater level of detail that we need to go to. For now, the drawings are fairly simple because the concepts are fairly conceptual. We need to go to another level of detail. Now, let me clarify, Bruce.
Mountain water was one of our key stakeholders. We spent about an hour talking to them about what the plans were, how their operation, everything like that.
we haven't gotten to this level, what do you do from type of discussion?
So at this point, nobody should be nervous about we drew a bubble with your building in it, because we did that to a lot of people. So here's what I want to accomplish. Let's take in the next 15 or 20 minutes. I want to give you a chance to go up and take a closer look at these drawings, because I know you couldn't read them on the slides all that well, and you for sure couldn't see scenario B since I put the wrong picture in there. We're going to hand out a scorecard right now, and there we go. The scorecard will be on the tables by the scenario. This is what it looks like, and what we want you to do is go check out the alternatives, and I've asked Jay to be back there by that drawing to answer questions, and Bruce to be by scenario B to answer questions, and Aaron to be by scenario C. So if I didn't satisfy you with what's happening, they're the ones that did the drawings and are at the closest level of detail. They'll be glad to answer any of your questions. And there's going to be one of these score sheets at each table. So you get to fill out 3 score sheets. And what we want you to do is we took these 5 categories that we outlined in the presentation: streetscape design, safety, connections and linkages, user accessibility, and development and land use. And we'd like you to rank how did this scenario do on each of those categories, giving it a 10. You don't have to rank them against each other. It's just giving it a 10 if you think it's just really did great, and giving it a 1 if you think it really stunk, and anywhere in the middle. And that'll give it an overall score. And you can add, if you want to add comments here or scribble on the front or the back of the forms, this will be a great way for you to give us some feedback. A little later in the evening, we'll give you another feedback form to fill us out. But if you mostly sort of quickly give these a score, and there's a lot of people in the room, so your score is going to have a lot of other weight. We'll recognize that this is not the most scientific thing we've ever done, but it'll be interesting. So I think you can do this in 15 or 20 minutes, and I'll just kind of keep watch on how it's going. If you'll fill those out and turn them in, then we'll come back and you'll have more information. You will have had to take a chance, and then we want to give you a chance to tell us if you think we're nuts or where it's going. Aaron's going to go type like crazy and enter your data, and before you leave this evening, we'll tell you how the scores came out. And basically our purpose for tonight is for you to rip these apart, tell us what you think, give us feedback, tell us what you like, and then our job tomorrow will be to take bits and pieces of these based on what we heard tonight and try and develop some more detail on a preferred scenario and give you some economic and transportation analysis of that. So does that make sense so far? So take 15 or 20 minutes and take a look at these and fill out those scorecards. Thank you.